So we're on this one-year anniversary. We continue to reflect on this pandemic. The amount of loss can be numbing. More than 500,000 lives gone in this country. Unemployment numbers at unprecedented highs, and social gatherings essentially gone, isolated. Everybody's been on their own to a certain degree.
Exactly. And so a headline, this is really fascinating, in the Washington Post stated, pandemic grief could become its own health crisis, with quarantining making the grieving process that much more solitary. So the big question, how is this impacting our nation's health, and how can we move forward in the face of such staggering loss? So
we want to bring in now our chief medical correspondent, of course, Dr. Ashton, bringing her back in from Citi Field, along with grief expert David Kessler and Minneapolis Reverend and certainly friend of our show here, Angela Khabeb. Good to see you all here with us. And Reverend Khabeb, I want to start with you. You say as a country, we don't necessarily grieve well. What do you mean by that?
Well, we don't take the time to process the grief. It's like we want to press a fast forward button. Like if a child's goldfish dies in the morning, we are out the door at the pet store buying a new goldfish. So there's a Mr. Bubbles swimming around in the tub before the child gets home from school. It's here's the thing, we cannot, there's no shortcut through grief, and grief is very patient. It will just wait for us. Grief ain't got nothing else to do. It's like grief has a fishing pole, you know, sitting by the dock of the bay, watching the dry. Grief will just wait for us. There is no back to normal after this. Even after everyone's vaccinated, the grief and the trauma will still be waiting there for us.
And David, the grief and the trauma during this pandemic has been especially difficult because so many people who lost loved ones weren't able to say their goodbyes in person. Many people weren't able to hold funerals in person. What does that do to the grieving process when you really don't feel like you got the closure that you needed?
Well, you're so right, Amy. It complicates things, and it's a heartbreak on top of an already existing heartbreak. I want to tell people, if you were not able to be there with your loved one, just remember your loved one died with all of your love, and their grief still needs to be witnessed.
Dr. Ashton, a lot of people are going through their own thing, and a lot of people are still looking for ways to support others. How do you do that? How do you help somebody else grieve when you're going through your own thing?
Well, you know what, TJ? They don't teach a course on that in medical school. So the way I learned it is I wasn't the one supporting someone else. I was actually the one getting support when we suffered the loss of my children's father. So I will tell you that what I learned in that process is you don't need any credentials to support someone. You don't need to say anything to support someone. Sit with them, hold their hand, listen more than you talk. And if you have questions and you need support to support someone else, get professional help from faith leaders, from professional mental health counselors. But my motto, and I lived through this, is if you want to heal, you have to feel, just like we just heard. And so that grief, that pain has to come out.
Yeah, it's a part of the process. That was beautifully put, Jen. David, I wanted to ask you about this as well, because, you know, a lot of people are fortunate enough not to have lost anyone particularly, but they've lost a lot of other things. They've lost their freedom. They've lost their ability to have social gatherings. They've lost, a lot of people have put weddings and all sorts of things that were meaningful to them on pause, on hold, indefinitely. How do you help people navigate that feeling of loneliness and isolation just from life itself?
Well, the first thing we have to do is along the lines of what Dr. Jen said. We have to name it, because we can't heal what we don't feel. You know, people are getting up going, I feel so heavy, or it's so sad when I go out to see all the restaurants that have closed and the world's so different. We have to name that as grief. We have to understand what it is. Then we have to recognize what's in our control and what's not in our control, and do the things that are in our control.
And kind of to his point, Reverend Khabeb, is a question here we want to, from one of our viewers. Katie came in on Instagram and asked this, that with vaccines rolling out, I'm really contemplating on how I want my life to look going forward on the other side of the pandemic. Any recommendations of how we can step out in our rebirthed life now that so much has changed in the past year? And I bet a lot of people have that question.
Wow, rebirth. I love the sound of that. So now that we are born again, as she says, Katie, I think now is the time that we embrace what we've learned from 2020. And it's a painful reality that we know life is terribly short. Now's the time to venture out. Do the things that we have been afraid to do for so long. If we have, maybe we wanted to travel more, to go back to school, and maybe finish our bachelor's or our master's or a PhD, even a GED. Let's go and do the things that we were timid to do, even if it's something simple. Do you know how many calligraphy sets I've purchased over this pandemic, and I haven't opened a single one of them? Let's branch out and look at our fears, face them, chase them, and embrace them.
Reverend Angela Khabeb, David Kessler, Dr. Jen, thank you all for joining us today. This was such an incredibly important conversation. I know it's a tough topic to talk about, but I'm so appreciative that you all were willing to give us your time and your incredible insight.
Thank you.
Well, hey there, GMA fans. Robin Roberts here. Thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Lots of great stuff here. So go on, click the subscribe button right over here to get more of awesome videos and content from GMA every day, anytime. We thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the morning on GMA.